The relentless Texas sun hung high over Interstate 45, baking the asphalt and warping the horizon into a shimmering mirage. The steady hum of traffic was suddenly disrupted. Cars slowed to a crawl, then came to a complete stop. But there was no accident, no wreckage, no fallen tree. Instead, something small yet fierce stood defiantly in the middle of the highway. A bobcat kitten, its spotted coat dusted with dirt, blocked the road as if refusing to move until someone listened. It wasn't running in panic or frozen in fear, it was waiting. Officer Madison Carter had been with the Texas Highway Patrol for over a decade. And in that time, she had seen her fair share of bizarre calls. But this? A wild animal stopping traffic like it had a purpose? This was new. She pulled up behind the growing line of vehicles, her patrol car's red and blue lights flashing. Stepping out, she adjusted her Stetson against the sun's glare and approached the scene with the measured confidence of a seasoned officer. A middle-aged man in a Dallas Cowboys t-shirt wiped sweat from his brow as he waved her over. "Officer, this little guy's been at it for nearly 20 minutes. Keeps running out, then darting back. Almost caused a wreck when a semi had to slam the brakes." Madison's sharp hazel eyes scanned the highway. Sure enough, there it was, a small bobcat kitten, pacing along the median, tail flicking in agitation. Unlike most wild animals, which would have fled at the first sign of humans, this one seemed to be trying to get attention. "Anyone try to approach it?" she asked. The man shook his head. "No, ma'am, we figured it's wild, didn't want to get too close." But he hesitated, glancing back at the animal. "It ain't acting right, almost like it wants us to follow it." That sent a chill down Madison's spine. Wild animals didn't behave this way. She had dealt with injured deer, lost dogs, and even the occasional escaped livestock. But a bobcat actively seeking human help? That was unheard of. Resting a hand near her holster, just in case, Madison moved toward the kitten, keeping her steps slow and measured. The animal took notice but didn't bolt. Instead, it watched her with unnervingly intelligent golden eyes, as if waiting for something. Then she saw it. A small metallic device was fastened to the kitten's hind leg, reflecting the harsh sunlight. Madison's heart kicked up a beat. That wasn't a wildlife tracking collar. It looked like a locator tag. Her instincts fired on high alert. This wasn't just a lost animal. Someone had put that tag there. Someone who might be in trouble. Madison retreated to her patrol car and grabbed her radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. I need Fish and Wildlife on site ASAP. We may have a situation." Whatever this bobcat was trying to tell them, Madison was determined to find out. An unusual clue. Madison leaned against her patrol car, eyes fixed on the bobcat kitten as it continued pacing near the highway's median. The tiny creature, barely old enough to be on its own, didn't run or hide, it just kept glancing back at her. Its golden eyes filled with an eerie sense of urgency. Minutes later, a white Texas Parks and Wildlife pickup truck pulled up behind her cruiser. Out stepped Dr. Ethan Collins, a seasoned wildlife biologist with sun-weathered skin and the no-nonsense air of a man who had spent his life tracking animals through the Texas wilderness. "Madison," he greeted, adjusting his cap as he shut the truck door. "Dispatch said you had something unusual. Bobcat blocking traffic?" She nodded, motioning toward the kitten. "But it's not just any bobcat. Look at its leg." Ethan followed her gaze, raising a pair of binoculars for a closer look. Within seconds, his expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "What is it?" Madison asked, her instincts already telling her this was bigger than just an odd wildlife encounter. "That's not a standard wildlife tracker," Ethan said, lowering the binoculars. "It looks like an emergency locator beacon, the kind issued to hikers and campers in case they get lost or injured." Madison felt the weight of the situation settle over her. "So you're telling me someone out there could be in trouble?" Ethan nodded. "And this little guy might be trying to lead us to them." That was all Madison needed to hear. She reached for her radio. "Dispatch, I need a check on any missing persons reported in the last 48 hours. Especially in the Big Bend National Park region." A few moments of silence passed before the dispatcher responded. "Copy that, Officer Carter. We have one active case, missing hiker. Name's Daniel Harper, 42 years old, experienced outdoorsman. He checked in for a solo trip 2 days ago but missed his scheduled check-in last night." Madison exchanged a glance with Ethan. "Harper," Ethan said thoughtfully, tapping his chin. "That name sounds familiar." He quickly pulled out his tablet and began scrolling through records. A few seconds later, his eyes widened. "Got it. Daniel Harper isn't just a hiker. He's a wildlife rehabilitator specializing in big cats. If this bobcat has his locator tag, then it's his." Madison finished. Or at least, he was tracking it before he went missing. The realization sent a ripple of urgency through them both. The kitten let out a small, insistent cry, then took a few steps toward the dense tree line bordering the highway before stopping to look back. Madison's pulse quickened. "It wants us to follow." Ethan exhaled sharply. "This is crazy, but I've seen enough animal behavior to know we shouldn't ignore it. If Harper's out there and injured, he won't last long in this heat." Madison grabbed her gear. "Then let's move." She quickly radioed for backup, requesting search and rescue teams to be on standby. With that, she and Ethan crossed the highway and followed the bobcat into the wilderness, leaving behind the stalled traffic, the curious bystanders, and the scorching Texas sun. Whatever lay ahead in the trees, one thing was certain: this was no ordinary rescue mission. Into the wilderness, Madison followed closely behind Ethan as they stepped off the asphalt and into the rugged terrain beyond the highway. The scorching heat of the open road gave way to a dense thicket of oak and juniper trees, their tangled branches casting dappled shadows on the dry earth below. The air was thick with the scent of sun-baked leaves and distant wildflowers. But there was no time to appreciate the scenery. Just ahead, the bobcat kitten, now identified as Luna, moved with surprising intent. She didn't dart or hesitate like a frightened wild animal. She was leading them. Every few steps, she would pause, glance back to make sure they were following, then continue forward, her small frame weaving effortlessly through the underbrush. Madison adjusted the radio on her shoulder. "Dispatch. Carter here. We are proceeding into the woods, following what appears to be a trained bobcat with an emergency locator tag. Be advised, the missing hiker, Daniel Harper, is a wildlife rehabilitator specializing in big cats. We believe this bobcat may be connected to him." "Copy that, Officer Carter. Nearest backup is 20 minutes out. Proceed with caution." Ethan stepped over a fallen log, his sharp eyes scanning the ground. "This part of the forest isn't a common hiking trail," he murmured. "If Harper ended up here, something must have gone wrong." Madison frowned. "Think he got lost?" "Doubt it," Ethan replied. "From what I remember, Harper was one of the best at wilderness navigation. If he's missing, there's a reason." As they ventured deeper, the terrain became more uneven. Madison spotted fresh boot prints in the soft dirt, large, deep impressions. She pointed. "Someone came through here recently." Ethan crouched, running his fingers over the tracks. Size 11 or 12, definitely a man's hiking boot. Looks like he was moving steadily. But, he moved his hand forward, tracing a disturbed patch of dirt. Then he fell. Madison felt her pulse quicken. Could be Harper. A few feet ahead, something caught her eye, a torn backpack strap, tangled in the low branches of a bush. She grabbed it and turned it over in her hands. Dark red stains smeared the fabric. "Blood," she muttered. Ethan took a deep breath, his expression darkening. This just got a lot more serious. Luna let out a small, urgent cry and patted ahead. The tiny bobcat had stopped just before a sudden drop-off, a steep ravine, almost 30 feet deep. Madison and Ethan carefully approached the edge. The ground crumbled slightly beneath her boots as she leaned forward, her gaze scanning the bottom of the ravine. Then she saw him, Daniel Harper. His body was partially obscured by a fallen tree, his leg trapped beneath a thick, splintered branch. His face was pale, his lips cracked, and even from this distance, Madison could tell he was in bad shape. But he was alive. At the sound of rustling above, Harper stirred, blinking sluggishly up at them. He lifted a weak arm in the faintest of waves. "Damn," Madison whispered. "He made it through the night." Ethan was already reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, we've located the missing hiker. He's injured, trapped at the bottom of a ravine. But he's alive, requesting immediate medical evacuation." Madison's adrenaline surged. "We need to get down there." "I'll go first," Ethan said. "I've got medical supplies in my pack." Madison nodded, watching as Ethan carefully navigated his way down the steep slope. using tree roots and rocks for support. Luna, astonishingly agile, found her own way down, moving with the effortless grace of her species. Harper's weak, hoarse voice reached them. "Luna, she found you?" Madison smirked, "More like she dragged us here." Harper let out a breathy chuckle, but the pain in his expression was undeniable. "Smart girl." As Ethan knelt beside him, checking his injuries, Madison radioed in more details. "Subject is conscious but dehydrated. Possible broken leg. Needs immediate transport." Above them, the sound of approaching sirens echoed through the trees. Help was on the way. Luna settled beside Harper, her spotted fur pressed against his side as if she understood he needed comfort. Madison stared at the scene, shaking her head in disbelief. This bobcat hadn't just found help. She had saved his life. And now, she wondered, what else was this extraordinary animal capable of? A life saved. Madison knelt near the edge of the ravine, gripping the radio tightly as the distant wail of approaching sirens grew louder. Help was coming, but would it be fast enough? Ethan was already working to stabilize Daniel Harper, carefully examining his injuries. His leg's definitely broken, possibly a compound fracture. He's dehydrated, and from the bruising on his head, I'd bet he's got a mild concussion. Daniel let out a weak chuckle. "I've had better days." Madison smirked, relieved that he was at least lucid enough to joke. But the real credit didn't belong to them. She glanced at Luna, who was still curled up protectively beside Daniel, pressing her small body against his like a guardian. "You owe this one your life." "Harper," Madison said. Daniel's tired eyes flickered toward the bobcat, a soft smile forming on his cracked lips. "Yeah, smart girl. Knew she could do it." Ethan shook his head in amazement. "I've worked with wildlife for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. A bobcat leading people to a rescue? That's next level." Above them, the distant hum of helicopter blades signaled that search and rescue was almost there. Madison quickly relayed their location to dispatch, ensuring the medics knew exactly where to land. "Stay with me, Harper," Ethan urged, offering him small sips of water from his canteen. "Help's coming, just hang in there." Daniel exhaled a slow breath, wincing from the pain. "I wasn't sure she'd go for help. Wasn't even sure I'd make it through the night." He reached a trembling hand toward Luna, and the bobcat nuzzled into his touch. Madison watched the scene unfold, her skepticism from earlier fading into complete admiration. "How did she even know to come to the road?" she asked. Daniel swallowed hard before answering. "Luna was raised around humans before she came into my care. Part of her rehab was teaching her that roads meant people, and people meant help." He coughed lightly. "I didn't know if she'd do it, but she did." Just then, the first responders arrived, lowering a rescue stretcher down into the ravine. Ethan and Madison worked quickly to help secure Daniel as the paramedics assessed his condition. As they hoisted him up, Luna tried to follow, letting out a small, distressed cry. Daniel turned his head weakly. "She's not ready to be on her own yet. Someone needs to take care of her." Ethan stepped forward without hesitation. "I'll take responsibility for her. Until you're back on your feet." Relief flooded Daniel's face as he was lifted onto the stretcher. "Thank you." Madison watched as the paramedics carried him toward the waiting helicopter. A man's life had been saved, by a creature most people wouldn't have thought twice about. And something told her this wasn't the last she'd be seeing of Luna. A new beginning. The helicopter lifted off, carrying Daniel Harper toward the nearest hospital. But Madison Carter found herself unable to look away from the small bobcat kitten sitting quietly at the edge of the ravine. Luna had done the impossible. She had saved a man's life. Ethan crouched beside the young bobcat, studying her closely. "She's an anomaly, Madison, a wild animal, yet somehow, she knew exactly what to do." Madison crossed her arms, still trying to process everything. "You're telling me, in all my years on patrol, I've never had a bobcat pull off a rescue mission?" Luna, as if sensing she was the topic of discussion, let out a soft chirping sound and rubbed against Ethan's leg. It was a gesture that felt more like a pet than a wild animal. Ethan smiled. Daniel was right, she's not ready to be released. If we let her go now, she'll either struggle in the wild or try to find humans again. Madison arched a brow. "So what happens to her now?" Ethan stood, brushing dirt off his knees. "I'll take her in for now. Make sure she gets the care she needs until Daniel's recovered." Madison glanced at Luna again, feeling an unexpected tug in her chest. She had come into this thinking it was just another routine call. But now, she felt connected to this animal in a way she never expected. 3 weeks later, Madison found herself pulling into the Austin Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. She had followed Luna's story as it spread across the news. Bobcat saves man's life, and when her sergeant suggested she do a community outreach follow-up, she jumped at the chance. The facility was surrounded by sprawling enclosures, built to mimic natural habitats. A young volunteer greeted her and led her toward a sunlit courtyard, where she spotted a familiar face. Daniel Harper. He sat in a wheelchair, his injured leg propped up, looking far healthier than the last time she had seen him. He smiled as she approached. "Officer Carter," he greeted warmly. "Good to see you under better circumstances." She chuckled. "Call me Madison. And yeah, you look a hell of a lot better than when I found you at the bottom of that ravine." Daniel motioned toward a nearby enclosure. "Luna's inside. Would you like to see her?" As they approached, Madison's breath caught slightly. Luna had grown in just a few weeks. Her frame was stronger, her muscles more defined, but those sharp golden eyes were just as intelligent as before. And when she saw Madison, she approached, not with fear, not with aggression, but with recognition. Daniel watched, impressed. "She remembers you." Madison smirked. "She better. I followed her into the woods." After all, Daniel chuckled. "Well, now she's got a new purpose. Ethan and I are launching a wildlife ambassador program, and Luna is going to be our first official ambassador. She'll teach people about conservation, the intelligence of wild animals, and," he smiled, "how sometimes nature saves us when we least expect it." Madison watched as Luna gracefully climbed onto a nearby rock, glancing back at her like she understood every word. A bobcat who had saved a man's life. A creature who had rewritten the line between wild and human. Madison tipped her hat slightly. "Well, Luna, looks like you found your calling." As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the sanctuary, she couldn't help but think, this wasn't just a rescue story. This was the beginning of something much bigger. And she was glad she had been there to witness it.